Welcome back to the Learning Designer's Playbook, and thank you for continuing this journey. You are now entering the third course in the playlist, which focuses on one of the most important distinctions in the field of instructional design, pedagogy versus andragogy. This may seem like a purely theoretical distinction, but as you'll see, it has enormous practical implications for how you design, structure, and deliver training programs. The reason we dedicate an entire session to this topic is that so many instructional designers inadvertently fall into the trap of treating adult learners as if they were still school children, and this leads to disengagement, frustration, and weak outcomes. By the end of today's course, you'll understand the roots of pedagogy, the framework of andragogy, and the key ways these models differ. More importantly, you'll leave with strategies you can apply immediately to respect adult learners' autonomy, motivation, and prior experience. This session builds directly on what you've learned so far, so keep in mind the principles from our last video as we move forward. This session is designed to do 5 key things. First, we will define pedagogy and andragogy clearly so that you can see where each comes from and why they are so often contrasted. Second, we will compare the differences in learner needs, showing how children and adults approach education from very different starting points. Third, we'll explore strategies that allow you to design learning specifically for adults, ensuring training feels practical, respectful, and empowering. Fourth, we'll identify common pitfalls that instructional designers should avoid when creating adult-focused programs. And finally, we'll talk about aligning your methods with the readiness and expectations of your learners, because no single approach works in all situations. Each of these goals builds on the last, and together they create a roadmap for better instructional design. Think of this as the foundation that will help you make every decision, from lesson pacing to activity design, more effective for your target audience. Before we dive into the differences between pedagogy and andragogy, let's quickly recap what we've covered so far. In our first course, Instructional Design for Beginners, your first 5 steps, we outline the core process of design: identifying learning needs, setting objectives, structuring lessons, creating materials, and implementing training. These steps form the roadmap for any instructional project and help new designers avoid common pitfalls. In our second course, The Psychology of Adult Learning, we focused on how adults learn differently. Motivation, relevance, and experience are central to their engagement, while self-direction gives them autonomy in how they learn. We also recognized common barriers like time pressures and cognitive overload, and suggested solutions such as designing practical, relevant activities that respect learners' limited time. Together, these lessons gave you both a process for building training and an understanding of the psychology behind adult learning. Today, we'll expand on those foundations by comparing pedagogy and andragogy, showing how each framework can guide your design decisions. Pedagogy is built on a cluster of assumptions that make sense when teaching children or any group of learners who lack prior knowledge in a particular domain. In pedagogical settings, the teacher is the primary decision maker. They choose the content, the sequence, the pace, and the assessments. Learners in this model are expected to be dependent on that guidance. They often rely on the instructor for structure, motivation, and feedback. The focus is typically on content coverage and ensuring that a defined curriculum is delivered in a reliable, consistent way. Motivation is frequently external. Grades, certification, parental expectations, or institutional requirements drive engagement more than intrinsic interest. Because pedagogy assumes limited prior experience, it emphasizes scaffolding, step-by-step explanations, worked examples, and highly structured practice. This structure reduces cognitive overload for novices and prevents key gaps in foundational knowledge. In many educational contexts, pedagogy works exceptionally well. It protects learners from confusion when the subject matter is unfamiliar or complex. For skill sets that require exact replication or strict procedures, for example, basic literacy, arithmetic, or safety protocols, pedagogy provides the predictable guidance learners need. That said, pedagogy can feel constraining when applied to learners who already have domain experience or when used in contexts that call for creativity problem solving, or immediate application. Instructional designers should therefore see pedagogy as a tool designed for particular contexts rather than a universal solution. It's also worth noting that pedagogy does not imply poor design. A skilled teacher can make highly engaging, learner-centered experiences within a pedagogical frame by incorporating active learning, informative checks. The key is to match the level of structure to the learner's readiness so the pedagogy functions as a supportive scaffold rather than a straitjacket. Ultimately, understanding these assumptions helps designers decide when to provide more direction and when to hand control back to learners. Andragogy begins from a very different set of assumptions that reflect how many adults tend to approach learning. First and foremost, it assumes that learners are capable of self-direction. Adults prefer to participate in decisions about their learning, from pacing to content emphasis. Second, it treats prior experience as an instructional asset rather than a distraction. An adult's workplace history, prior projects, or life lessons become raw material for learning activities like case studies, simulations, and peer coaching. Third, andragogy assumes motivation is primarily internal. Adults engage when they perceive direct relevance to their jobs, their goals, or their identities. Fourth, andragogical design prioritizes problem orientation. Learners want to solve real tasks, not just memorize content for future application. In practice, this means the instructor shifts roles from authority to facilitator, asking questions, curating resources, and creating opportunities for learners to test and adapt knowledge. Andragogy emphasizes practical application over abstract theory. The sooner learners can practice new skills in realistic contexts, the better the transfer. It also values collaborative learning. Discussion, peer critique, and shared reflections amplify individual experience into collective learning. Importantly, andragogy does not reject structure. Rather, it frames structure as supportive scaffolding that learners can take apart as they gain competence. Because adults typically juggle multiple responsibilities, andragogical design also focuses on efficiency, targeted modules, clear goals, and options for self-paced study. Finally, andragogy asks designers to respect learners' autonomy and dignity. When adults feel treated as partners in learning, engagement and retention increase substantially. These assumptions make andragogy particularly well suited for professional development, workplace learning, and continuing education, contexts where relevance, experience, and immediate use matter. When we compare pedagogy and andragogy side by side, several clear contrasts emerge, and each contrast has direct implications for design choices. Pedagogy situates knowledge transmission in the instructor. Andragogy distributes agency to the learner. In pedagogy, the teacher decides the curriculum. In andragogy, learners negotiate learning goals or choose pathways aligned to their needs. Pedagogical settings often rely on external incentives, grades, certificates, or managerial directives, but andragogical settings lean on intrinsic drives like mastery, relevance, and self-improvement. Pedagogy is typically content-driven, meaning the sequence of topics is the primary driver. Andragogy is experience-driven, where learners' backgrounds and workplace problems determine what is taught and how. Another difference shows up in assessment. Pedagogy often emphasizes standardized tests to verify knowledge acquisition, whereas andragogy favors performance tasks and workplace observations that reveal real-world application. Time is treated differently as well. Pedagogy assumes dedicated learning time provided by an institution, while andragogy acknowledges constrained schedules and often uses modular or micro-learning approaches. Importantly, these are not binary states but poles on a continuum. Some adult learning situations will need more structure, others more autonomy. Recognizing which side of the spectrum your learners fall on lets you choose methods deliberately. Lectures and worked examples for novices, casework and coaching for experienced adults. When designers understand these distinctions, they stop defaulting to one-way-fits-all and instead craft experiences that match learners' capabilities, constraints, and motivations. The practical payoff is higher engagement, better retention, and more consistent transfer of learning into practice. Although andragogy often gets the spotlight for adult education, pedagogy still has many practical uses in adult learning contexts. One clear scenario is when the material is entirely new to the learner. A novice needs structured guidance to avoid confusion and to build foundational schemas. In highly technical fields or compliance training, where small errors can cause safety problems or legal exposure, teacher-directed instruction ensures consistency and minimizes risk. In such cases, a pedagogical approach with explicit instruction, checklists, and supervised practice is not only efficient but ethically necessary. Similarly, when an entire cohort is starting from a similar baseline, for example, new hires in an apprenticeship program, a standardized pedagogical sequence guarantees equitable learning outcomes. Pedagogy is also useful when time is abundant, and the organization prioritizes uniform knowledge across large groups. That said, designers should be deliberate. Begin with pedagogy to establish essentials, then transition learners into more andragogical activities as competence grows. A staged approach can be very effective. Provide clear, direct instruction early, then scaffold toward independent problem solving and peer collaboration. The point is not dogma, but appropriateness. Pedagogy earns its place when the goal is to ensure safety, accuracy, and foundational understanding. When those conditions are met, learners are better prepared to benefit from more learner-led experiences later. Andragogy is particularly powerful in contexts where learners bring prior knowledge, need immediate application, and are motivated by professional goals. In professional development, adults typically want to practice skills that will improve job performance or career prospects. Andragogy matches that need by centering activities on real workplace tasks. Problem-based learning, case studies, simulations, and project work are excellent andragogical strategies because they allow participants to test solutions, receive feedback, and reflect on outcomes in contexts that mirror their jobs. Collaborative learning is another hallmark of andragogy. When learners share experiences and critique each other's approaches, the group constructs richer understanding than any single instructor could deliver. Andragogy also supports transfer to actual performance because the learning experiences are designed to be authentic, applied, and immediately useful. Furthermore, digital platforms that enable choice, micro-learning, and self-paced modules align well with adults' schedules and learning preferences. Training that uses coaching, on-the-job practice, and reflective activities tends to produce higher retention and better workplace outcomes. That said, andragogy requires careful design to supply just enough structure and scaffolding. When applied well, it empowers learners to own their development while ensuring relevance and measurable impact. In short, when your goal is application, reflection, and professional growth, andragogy typically yields the best results. The most pragmatic instructional designs rarely rely solely on pedagogy or andragogy. Instead, they blend elements of both to meet learners where they are. A common pattern is to begin with pedagogical clarity when introducing unfamiliar concepts. Concise explanations, worked examples, and guided practice establish core knowledge. As learners gain confidence and competence, designers can pivot toward andragogical strategies, open exploration, problem solving, and peer feedback that encourage ownership. This stage progression creates a learning pathway that reduces cognitive overload while building independence. Scaffolding is central to this approach. Support learners early with prompts, checklists, and modeled performance. Then gradually remove supports as competence grows. Blended approaches also recognize learner heterogeneity. Within a single cohort, some participants may need more structure, while others are ready for autonomy. So offering optional pathways or differentiated tasks helps everyone progress. Technology can assist here by enabling adaptive sequences, on-demand resources, and self-assessment tools. Importantly, assessment should match the model. Early checkpoints can be pedagogical quizzes for comprehension, while later assessments evaluate applied performance or workplace outcomes. The designer's job is to diagnose readiness and choose the right mix of guidance and independence, continually adjusting based on learner feedback and performance data. When done well, blending pedagogy and andragogy optimizes engagement, retention, and transfer. Let's make these ideas concrete with real-world examples. In onboarding, organizations often combine a pedagogical orientation, rules, policies, and essential procedures, with role-based andragogical practice. Learners engage in simulations, shadowing, and project work that connects new hires to job realities. For compliance training, pedagogy ensures that everyone learns the mandatory rules the same way, but adding case studies and scenario practice turns rote knowledge into situational judgment and ethical decision-making. Leadership development programs are often primarily andragogical, relying on peer coaching, action learning projects, and reflective practice to help leaders integrate new insights into their daily work. In technical training, beginning with instructor demonstrations guarantees baseline safety and accuracy. Subsequent troubleshooting labs and real tasks then allow learners to apply principles, make mistakes safely, and develop problem-solving fluency. In blended learning environments, an LMS can host short pedagogical videos followed by andragogical discussion boards and live workshops that focus on applying concepts. Each of these examples shows how context and objectives determine the right mix of pedagogy and andragogy. The designer's task is to align methods to the outcome. If the goal is immediate, correct application, structure prevails. If the goal is adaptive expertise, give learners space to experiment and reflect. These application patterns are flexible and can be adapted to industry, audience, and scale. While andragogy promises many benefits, putting it into practice can be challenging, and designers must plan for common obstacles. First, not every adult is equally self-directed. Some learners expect more guidance and may feel anxious when faced with open tasks. The mitigation is scaffolding. Provide templates, optional guided modules, and clear success criteria so learners can ramp up their autonomy gradually. Second, time constraints and competing priorities are real barriers. Adults balancing work and life may struggle to engage in long, self-paced activities. Break content into micro-modules, offer multiple scheduling options, and integrate learning into workflow to reduce friction. Third, motivation and readiness vary. Some learners are intrinsically driven, others participate because of managerial mandates. Use relevance hooks, short wins, and visible workplace applications to increase buy-in and collect early feedback to tailor the experience. Fourth, resistance to unfamiliar methods like role play or peer critique can surface. Normalize discomfort by explaining the purpose, modeling the activities, and starting with low-stakes practice. Assessment design can also help. Combine formative checks with performance tasks that demonstrate tangible value, which increases perceived return on investment. Finally, facilitators must be skilled at balancing freedom and support that requires training, rubrics, and a clear facilitation playbook. Anticipating these challenges and designing mitigations into your program ensures that andragogical approaches benefit the broadest possible range of learners rather than only the most self-directed minority. Our featured resource for this course is The Adult Learner by Malcolm Knowles. This book is the foundational text that first introduced and formalized the concept of andragogy, making it an essential reference for anyone working in instructional design, corporate training, or adult education. Knowles identifies 6 major principles of adult learning, ranging from self-concept and experience to readiness and orientation to learning. What makes this book so influential is that it doesn't just stop at theory. It also offers practical examples and real-world applications. For instructional designers, it provides a roadmap for how to treat adult learners differently than children, highlighting the importance of autonomy, motivation, and immediate applicability. The text has been revised multiple times to reflect changing learning contexts, including workplace training, online education, and blended models. By studying this book, you'll gain both the vocabulary and the strategies you need to defend your design choices and explain why adult learning requires a unique approach. If you only read one work on andragogy, this should be it. It remains just as relevant today as when it was first published, and it continues to shape how trainers, educators, and designers build meaningful adult learning experiences. Let's recap the key takeaways from today's lesson. We began with pedagogy, a teacher-centered model often used with children, where the teacher controls the agenda and learners follow. In contrast, Andragogy highlights the needs of adults, emphasizing autonomy, relevance, and respect for prior experiences. Adults are motivated by personal and professional goals, and they expect learning that applies immediately to real contexts. We explored strategies that align with this approach, such as case studies, problem solving, and flexible pacing. These methods help learners connect new knowledge to existing skills. We also warned against treating adults as passive recipients, which often leads to disengagement. Ultimately, pedagogy and andragogy are not opposites, but points on a spectrum. Understanding both allows instructional designers to adapt their approach. By applying adult learning principles thoughtfully, you can move beyond generic content and create training that resonates and makes an impact. To summarize, the real value of instructional design lies in understanding how adults learn. Autonomy, relevance, and prior experience are not optional. They're central to engagement. When adults feel respected and see immediate application, they are far more motivated to learn. Designers must also account for readiness. Adults balance many responsibilities, so training should be clear, purposeful, and worth their time. When challenges like limited time or overload are anticipated, design becomes more supportive and effective. The ultimate goal is not just to deliver content, but to create outcomes learners can apply. By embedding principles like respect, relevance, and practice into every stage, you transform training into meaningful experiences. That's what distinguishes impactful design. It doesn't just inform, it equips and inspires lasting growth. As we wrap up this lesson, remember that the distinction between pedagogy and andragogy isn't just academic. It has real implications for how you design and deliver training. Pedagogy reminds us of the structured, teacher-led approaches suited for children and novice learners, where guidance, structure, and external direction are most effective. Andragogy, on the other hand, emphasizes the unique needs of adults, their desire for autonomy, their wealth of experience, and their preference for learning that connects directly to real-world applications. As an instructional designer, your role is to determine where on this spectrum your learners fall and to adapt accordingly. Adult learners are rarely passive recipients. They want to contribute, question, and apply. So your design must create space for that. By respecting their time, honoring their experiences, and aligning content with their goals, you transform training from a requirement into an opportunity for growth. This is where theory meets practice. Andragogy is not simply about knowing definitions, but about making choices in pacing, activity design, and facilitation style. The featured resource for this lesson, The Adult Learner by Malcolm Knowles, provides a deeper dive into how these principles came to shape the field of adult education and remain central to our practice today. I encourage you to explore it as a way to strengthen both your understanding and your confidence in applying these concepts. As you continue on this journey through the Learning Designer's Playbook, remember that each lesson builds on the last, giving you a progressively stronger toolkit. In our next video, we'll shift from broad learning theories to something highly practical: Bloom's taxonomy and how to write learning objectives that actually work. Objectives are the foundation of any successful instructional design project, and understanding how to write them will ensure your training is measurable, focused, and impactful. So, take a moment to reflect on today's lesson. Consider how you can apply Andragogy in your current or future projects, and then get ready to take the next step. The journey toward becoming a skilled learning designer is built step by step, and you're already building strong momentum.